Welcome everybody. I think we've got about 850 people signed up to attend this event, which is brilliant. And I hope you're sitting comfortably. It's been a very busy end of the 2025 and beginning of 2026. It's a privilege to have Joanna Averley here today, Chief Planner for MHCRG. Joanna's going to take us through an overview of planning reform, I suppose, in the latter part of 2025. And then we'll do a question and answer. So just a bit about what's going to happen today. So the chat function is off. That's because it's really distracting. And we want to concentrate on having a good conversation rather than reading through the chat. Everyone's on mute, so you won't be able to speak out and we won't be able to hear your doorbells go and all that sort of stuff. And if you want to pose questions, you'll either have done that beforehand or you will be doing that through Slido. So please log into Slido and put your questions in as we go along, and we'll try to pick up as many as possible. So without further ado, Joanna, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. We were just reflecting earlier on that it's like doing a mock exam. So I know my kids are doing mocks at the minute, and if you're in the room, you'd see that we've got lots of paper in front of us. And I think that what that reflects is that obviously national government see planning as a really key tool in how we deliver economic growth and also meeting the housing crisis. And what that means is, as a department and our ministers and with officials have been incredibly busy. But I just sort of want to say from the outset that we, really do recognise, what we're asking of local government, and particularly a huge thanks to colleagues in local government who are operating the planning system, using it for good, and keeping the show on the road in what is a really changing context. And change is always difficult in any context as we try and deliver a really professional service to our communities. But I just want to reflect on the fact that change is sort of coming at you from a number of angles, and we could talk about local government reorganisation and conversations that Anna and I are having around how we support that process. But also I just also want to recognise and start from the top, talking about local authorities, just strong willingness and capacity to deliver, and this government's commitment to supporting that change programme. And really delighted, even just in the latest budget, which, as we know, was sort of tight from a fiscal point of view. The department received an additional £48 million to support the changes to the planning system. And that is on top of already quite a significant annual budget. That again, we're working with PAS about how we support you guys on the ground, that both through recruitment and retention, but also through the change programme. So altogether, that's quite a significant investment, and that sits alongside obviously the fee increases that you are able to both charge now compared to where we were, say, 2-3 years ago, but also increasingly the ability to set local fees. So we can talk a bit more about what that feels like, and sort of some of our kind of joint work on that. But just to say, we already set out some of the funding available for plan making in November. We also, alongside the NPPF, announced the £8 million to support local authorities, particularly under pressure, development management services. And we're really delighted to say there's more money coming for the end of the year. So you will see some pretty rapid fire requests for expressions of interest coming out from the department. And we will try and make it as lean as possible in terms of the information we ask of you, because we know even just that is an extra burden on you teams. But please keep an eye out for that and make the most of that investment. So maybe something, Anna, we can come back to in terms of context.
Yeah.
So what I just wanted to do was, and I am not going to read out the NPPF to you or a ministerial speech, but really, just to go through some of the headlines of the change that that's in front of us or was already over the line. And also just to note that this is just a scene setter for some really engaged sessions which PAS are helping us run. Some of them are in person, some of them are online. Please, take the opportunity to sort of dive into those sessions. And really, really important, particularly in terms of the NPPF, this is the start of a consultation process. The deadline for comments is the 10th of March. I was really struck when looking at the questions online, and thanks for everybody who's put questions already up on Slido, that people are asking for clarifications about things and making comments. That is great. What we want you to do is use the opportunity of this consultation window to say, this isn't clear, or we need more information, or actually, I don't know how this works, or I'm not sure it will work, or this is a really powerful policy. It makes all the right noises and gives all the right indications to both plan makers and decision makers and applicants and communities. So that is the nature of the consultation. There'll be things I know you're dying to know that I genuinely don't have an answer for, because we're in this consultation window, and there are still, obviously, ministers will reflect on what you tell us and what you feed back to us, and then review the policies and ultimately obviously issue a full NPPF. So a few bits just to sort of highlight in terms of, we'll talk a little bit about the NPPF, stuff that's come through the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is now an Act, and a few other things besides that are sort of playing through. It was quite intentional that we restructured the NPPF. Obviously, quite a big job in and of itself, but obviously, therefore, practically, we recognise more impactful for teams, because you can't, the familiarisation isn't necessarily there between how you've been functioning and making decisions and preparing plans and the new policies. But I think in general, what I'm hearing, and I think it's really evident when you just read the NPPF from start to finish, is it's just much more coherent, it's much clearer, and you go to the section and the policies you expect to find there are there. So things are more bunched, more cohesive, actually drafted in a more direct and clear way. And that is all part of trying to make planning a bit more rules-based, and sort of easier to navigate, no matter who you are in the system. And we've worked really hard at that, and congratulations to the team who've done that. And I hope you can see that as you engage with the document, the sort of readiness to sort of be able to actually then bring the document to life in terms of how your level is there. I'm just going to highlight, I suppose, some sort of key changes. I'm not going to attempt to be comprehensive, and then just, as I say, mention other things that are in play. So obviously, first up, the policies on plan making and decision making, making it very clear that, in setting out policies for plan making, we are introducing strategic planning back into the system and SDSs. And I really first time that we've made a substantive comment and sort of indication of what an SDS is going to be. So really important scene setter there. It's going to be strategic, obviously. It's going to be spatial. It's not going to seek to sort of repeat what happens locally or nationally. It's going to be digitally enabled. It's going to deal with nature. It's going to deal with sustainable choices. It's going to deal with those big spatial decisions that need to happen at that level. And that is, I suppose, is probably one of the key things that's introduced way up front in the NPPF. And then, the principle strategic to local and down to the neighbourhood level, really sharp. And I'm sure people will have lots of questions about that. And then just skipping through to what is chapter 4, and titled Achieving Sustainable Development. Really important policies in relation to the presumption. And obviously the previous NPPF made really important strides towards saying it's brownfield land, we should be moving towards sort of questioning, well, why wouldn't this be developed, and dealing with those sorts of types of schemes really, and locations really proactively. And it introduces a really important and strong presumption around locations inside and outside of settlement, policies 4 and 5. And in policy 5, a really important introduction of the concept of development around stations outside settlement. And 2 broad criteria related to that, which are broadly numeric. One is targeting that towards the 60 main travel to work areas for our major urban and economies, and also locations that have got a decent service in terms of trams or trains, of about 4 trains an hour. And also saying that this is not supposed to be land that just sort of happens to be near a station, but a long distance from, and would create a car dependent development, but ones that are cohesive with an ability to sort of create a sustainable form of development. And that's very much underlined in the subsequent policies that you can read in chapter 15, which is sustainable transport. So that's probably quite a big move. I'm sure people have and got questions about that. And then again, sort of, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but really strong policies on climate change and climate adaptation, and then going into the policies on the supply of homes. And I think really interestingly, talking about the needs of our communities, for example, emphasis on older people's housing, housing for specialist needs, and of both the social housing and affordable housing. So that emphasis that came through in the last NPPF around social houses available for social rent. In the economy chapter, again, recognition of, I suppose, our evolving economy. For example, AI growth centres. Obviously, logistics have been large in our minds for a while as planners. Now we're moving goods around the country, and both last mile delivery, but also sort of strategic delivery across the country, and other aspects. And then high quality communications, again, just sort of these points of emphasis that just sort of evolve slightly. And then an entire chapter dedicated to clean energy and water. We all know that, you know, this government has made an incredibly strong move towards green energy production, and obviously last year lifted the moratorium on onshore wind, for example. And I think we're all very aware of the need to plan for water much more proactively, again, both at that strategic level and then how that feeds down to the local level as well. I would say then going on to the sort of subsequent chapters, I suppose chapter 12, which is making efficient use of land, has again got some policies that are significant in terms of their evolution from where we were. Again, this emphasis on the reuse of land and brownfield land in particular, and actually sort of saying and encouraging local authorities to think about minimum densities and doing that in a design-led way, understanding your context. A little bit more of that in a minute. And then policy L2, which talks about making the most of our existing sustainable areas, our neighbourhoods, and how can they tweak and evolve and change to accommodate new homes, because that's where the inherent sustainability lies in terms of transport, local facilities, local space and so on. Not much changed in the Greenbelt policies, but again, we may have questions on that. The policies in chapter 14, achieving well designed places, introduces the 7 principles that you will recall in the National Design Guide and the National Model Design Code. We did have 10 principles. We've reshaped that into 7 key principles, and I'm really delighted to say you won't have long to wait to benefit from sight of, you know, the consolidated set of policies for design and placemaking, which are a sort of a daughter document to the NPPF, and we'll be sharing those shortly, as announced by the Minister some time ago. You know, desire to look at that entire suite of policy and see that sort of in light of the NPPF and delivering places of quality and of lasting quality. Sustainable transport chapter I've mentioned already. Again, a very strong emphasis on how we can use new technology, and in particular the DFT connectivity tool, which is now very readily available to people, to sort of look at sustainable locations, be able to sort of say what are the right densities in certain locations, and actually where can we be a bit more forward-leaning in terms of parking standards as well, because we know catering for the car can take up an awful lot of land and an awful lot of space that could be well used for other things. Again, promoting healthy communities chapter, really strong on the obvious things around healthy communities and being holistic in that regard, but also incorporating policies on green space and social infrastructure and facilities, and then some just important particular additions in the chapter on pollution, public protection and security. And then the chapters on flood risk, enhancing nature and enhancing historic environment. I want to sort of point you towards an important point in the glossary, which is easy to miss, and I'm sure everybody's picked up, but obviously an introduction of a medium-sized development. And that is for schemes of 10 to 49 units and equal or less than 2.5 hectares. So again, how that plays through in terms of other policies in relation to other types of regulation, including, say, for example, BNG, is really quite an important aspect of this. And again, creating a development management system that is proportionate to the scale of development and the issues at play with individual decisions. And shall I just go on to a few other bits and bobs? Yes. And then we would want to go over to questions. So I'll talk for about another, I'll give you sort of key updates for about another 10 minutes or so. So I'm really conscious that colleagues will want to know a lot about local plan making, and you will have seen that the Minister before Christmas, again, before the NPPF, talked about the new local plan system. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, create and update your local plan. We loaded up the latest batch of information for local plan makers to sort of start to absorb the new system. We're really attempting, and hope it's proving helpful to people, to sort of where we can provide clear guidance, where we can template things, share it early. And so please keep an eye on Culp, as we obviously will tell you when we're updating more information. But, you know, I'm acutely aware that people are all at different stages in their plan making. You've also been asked to update your local scheme of delegation. You know, where are you at in your process? But we've also confirmed dates for local plan making. I'm just going to refer to my notes, because these things are, you know, there's a matrix of things going on here, and we're very aware of that. So I'm just going to sort of, just for complete clarity, be clear on that. So we are not going to be, the ministers have made a clear choice, which is great, to say go as fast as you can into the new local plan system for those that are going into the new system. And then we're not going to introduce things in waves. Sounds like a line from a song, doesn't it? Yeah. And so for those going into the new system, we're going to set a backstop date for when you should start Gateway 1, and that's the 31st of October this year. We're into 2026. If you have got a plan that's over 5 years old, you know, again, you're expected to start your processes by April 27. And then obviously noting that there's other plans already in that sort of transitionary process, and you will be familiar with these dates, but you need to be submitting to PINS by the 31st of December 2026 if you've had to go back to Reg 18. And if not, it's June this year, in fact, the 12th of June, a very specific date, if you were at Reg 19 and you had less than 80% on your LHN. The other thing to note, which is bites, is that we've softened on the duty to cooperate and the need to meet what is quite a sort of black and white, you know, parcel go or no go decision on the duty to cooperate, and PINS will be operating on a pragmatic basis in relation to the duty to cooperate. And worth reading across to PM10 in the NPPF, which talks about the nature of collaboration expected for plan making. And obviously local authorities should be demonstrating that you are talking to colleagues, but it's not a sort of go no go hurdle as it is or has been in the system. Okay, that's the NPPF. Just a few bits of extra. The Planning and Infrastructure Act, is it in now? It's achieved royal assent on the 18th of December. Again, is a sort of different, is a set of really important policies across a number of matters. Some operational for you, some more about law, and then regulation is to follow. So it is, you will be aware of most of this, but just for clarity, the planning committee reforms that obviously have been very strongly trailed through the bill process, and giving, you know, a national scheme of delegation. What's been interesting is quite a lot of people have fed back to me and other colleagues, obviously a desire not to be sort of hamstrung by the very high levels of delegation that people already operate under. And, you know, noted, and that's a really important point. And, you know, we would, as always, there's always legislation, which is the high level legal framework, and then we will follow up with the draft regulations to bring these provisions into force later this year. As I mentioned already, delegation for setting local planning fees, that you as local authorities are best placed to sort of understand the costs of running your services. And again, we'll be setting out guidance as to how you do that, hopefully quite soon. But in the meantime, operate on the basis of current national fees that we've already put out there. Some changes to development corporations. There's sort of a few aspects of the bill that are sort of tidying up a few things, in particular development corporations, and a new duty to cooperate with relevant transport authorities. As you can imagine, you bring forward a lot of change in an area, you want the transport and the land use to be speaking really collaboratively together. And then obviously what the Act does is brings in the duty for spatial development strategies. And I just want to mention as a side point, the relationship between this and local government reorganisation. And the great work that you guys are doing in the LGA. There's hubs that Powers run in the LGA with colleagues in the department to help people navigate through this process, but recognising that there's a desire for people to sort of start to prepare for SDSs. We'll say a lot more about this in the coming months, what that will look like, and I'm really delighted to say we've got a decent funding line that can support that programme of activities, and there's already some monies out there. But local government reorganisation and how you as teams are adapting to the prospect of local government organisation, we recognise that that's one of the challenges that you're facing, and more work to be done there, and conversation with the LGA more broadly and PAS specifically. A little bit of change on the compulsory purchase process, worth a mention, and then really importantly, aspects of change to the National Significant Infrastructure Projects consultation process. And then very, very importantly, the aspects of the Bill Now Act that address local nature recovery, preparation of environmental delivery plans that look across a geography about an environmental issue, and then create the framework where you can basically offset impacts of development, but invest in nature in a very strategic and targeted way and a planned way so that both nature wins and development can proceed appropriately. Obviously, always assuming that where development can, it should deliver on site, but that there is a sort of a way to deal with issues in a more comprehensive way at the scale that they should be considered. So, for example, when you're looking at a river, you want to look at the river catchment. You want to plan at that level for nature and for mitigation, and then provide the basis for which will be happening in different locations. Development contributes to some of the answers and the funding of those answers. So I think I'll leave it there. We could talk a lot more. There's a lot more to say, but those are probably the headlines for now, Anna, and we can move to questions.
I think we can build on that through the questions, because otherwise, I mean, say you could go on forever, couldn't you, about what's happened and how the changes have happened and what's in all the various different announcements. I suppose, should we start with how the government is proposing to introduce all of the planning reform alongside
system for some time, and that modernisation all happens with you guys locally. We set the framework for that, and we are hugely reliant on your energy and commitment to doing so. And I suppose what as LGR creates an extra quite big piece of change into the system, and that means that people's very environment, their literally their employer is changing, and the governance of that, and including the councils, will be changing around them, and that is significant, obviously hugely significant. In one way, this is a personal view. I'm not expressing the views of government here. What's really interesting about that, it means we start doing things at the right geography. From our point of view, we're talking about geographies of bigger populations, probably more akin to urban areas or groups of urban areas. And so from a planning point of view, not just from strategic planning, but local planning as well, it kind of all makes more sense. And I think from a capacity point of view, again, speaking directly to sort of planning, you have bigger teams and hopefully more resilience, and obviously ability to invest in digital, invest in skills, have those experts available to you that you might need on nature or heritage or urban design, whatever it may be. So the sort of scaling issue is an advantage, but that change programme is significant. And obviously internally within the department, we talk to our local government reorganisation colleagues about that and are actively doing that. And obviously with the support of Anna and local government, talking about what that change programme looks like. Because ultimately, what we're all going to have to do is figure out a change programme for plan making, just take that for example, or for example, digital transformation, and put that into the new geographies and what that looks like. So I think quite a lot of collective work to do on that. And it will be, I think, just have to be a really active conversation with colleagues locally and nationally.
Yeah, and I suppose, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I think it's about doing what you can do at the moment. Because there's a danger, isn't there, of inertia, which is that we don't do anything until the next thing happens. And I'm certainly keen that we all do what we can do with the information we've got. So if you're ready to do your local plan, do your local plan. If you're ready to do your SDS, start that. You know, there's a sense to it in just getting on with what you can do.
Can I say I completely agree with that, and I think one of the and definitely our ministers are very keen that people crack on with their local plan making, with their SDSs. And I know in terms of SDSs, it's like running and walking and, you know, cart and horses and all of that. You know, we do need to say more. We've said some in the NPPF, but there will be more said and more shared and more funded as well about that. But I think the other thing is to note is that we are in sort of streamlining plan making, both strategic and local. What we're also saying is we're trying to make the task more manageable. So and it's worth saying that in the digital space, you know, I know you'll have all looked at it, but open digital planning and the data we're making available, you know, I think collectively we can do things sharper, I hope. So the sort of the starting being daunting hopefully will reduce, because the clarity of what is required, even some information that actually starts you in that process, it's not quite such a big mountain to climb, we would hope.
Yeah, and so in terms of that starting, you know, let's start with local plans. I've got to say that sort of 90% of the questions are about local plans. So let's get into local plans and transition. So, you know, we've got some questions around, you know, continuing local plans under the current system, going into the new system, emerging plans. We've got every question going on local plans. Where do you want to start on this, Joanna? Do you want to start on transition? Do we start on the ones in the current system?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very simple message, to be honest, which is keep going. And you know, I'm sure the majority of people on this call are planners, but they may not be exclusively. And if we're not planning, we're kind of missing the trick, which is it is much better for decisions to be made on the basis of a strategic local spatial plan, and that it's therefore informed decision making, and you can kind of do things in sequence, ideally. And we all know that for many reasons we have got very limited local plan coverage at the moment, and that's sort of, we all want that to improve, don't we? And so it's sort of like, I can't see a world in where stopping and not continuing with a plan in the current system or moving into the future system isn't a sensible thing to do.
And what about the treatment of DM policies then? So that had a lot of airtime, hasn't it? So if you're in the current system and you've got your DM policies, and then you've seen the new DM policies in the NPPF, what would you recommend?
I mean, the NPPF obviously gives more than a strong a strong direction of travel. It is out for consultation. It is not yet government policy. It is really important that people feed back on it so that it can iterate and evolve in light of how people think it's going to operate. And if you have genuinely got questions about both how it will operate and what does it mean for me in a transitionary sense, but please state those questions. I mean, I know in a consultation we ask a series of questions, but you know, don't go wild, but you can also say, and another thing, you know, can you please clarify X, Y, and Z? And obviously through the workshops in particular, Anna, that you're helping with, and there's discussions, you know, again, we will get that feedback loop from colleagues on this call and on other calls and in other rooms. So ask us those questions, make those statements very clear and obvious. I think, you know, the direction of travel, as I say, it's more than a strong direction of travel. And you can kind of see that there will need to be a filtering of how we might have done development management policies before, and PINs will act as the filter. They will, you know, sort of use the examination process to say, well, actually, this is, you know, you are repeating national policy. It is unnecessary to do so. And you know, one assumes that, you know, we will be encouraging them to sort of do some of that, you know, to sort of create the streamlined plan making process that we're talking about. So, you know, you can start that process at any time, no matter where you are in this this complex matrix of transition, which is, well, how's my policy now? Where are there sort of sticky moments where I'm going to have to reconsider policy coverage? Is stripping stuff out, et cetera, and start to think through that.
Yeah, so I suppose also people are confused naturally, because there's a natural order to things, isn't it? That you get a strategic plan, a local plan, you know, and on and on and on. So I think we've already covered this, but just to be absolutely clear, we are expecting people to progress their local plans,
Yes.
even when there isn't an SDS in
Yes.
place. Yes, just I think it's worth having that
Yeah.
on record, because we get asked that at PAS a lot.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I'm going to recognise that it is complex and it is, I mean, a non-technical term, well, a bit confusing, and potentially, particularly the outside world, for the non-professional world, it may appear messy. But you know, we are saying keep going with your local plan. And at some point, the SDSs will come in, and there will be a touch point.
Yeah.
You know, and then there will be the, you know, we will need to describe better what that touch point looks like for the plans sort of going forward. But you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're all having to be very reactive to this constant change. But this is about setting up a system for the medium term.
Yeah.
And it feels really massive change now. But let's just remember what the objective is, which is really strong SDSs, which cover off issues including infrastructure and nature and where you do put the big stuff and all the rest of it. And a big conversation for mayors and their communities, which I think is really powerful. And then local plans that continue to iterate, you know, and are this proactive plan-led system. And so we're in this, you know, it is a phase of like really big investment for everybody to get us towards that and then into that sort of hopefully more regularized system.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, I'm a huge fan of SDSs and anything strategic, and I think having the natural order put back in is really, really helpful actually when we're in place. So sorry, back to DM policies. I missed the big issue, which is why are they not statutory?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, this was a matter of much discussion because it's a big call and a really important discussion. And it's covered off in the consultation document. So if you do want to understand the sort of like the nuance of the decision, please do look there. But in effect, short version is the decision was we can do something powerfully in NPPF, which I think people will see in the policy already that's there, or proposed policy that's there that says, you know, don't repeat, don't just tweak unnecessarily, you know, and that will follow through in terms of examination. And that it also gives, you know, if you go statutory, you have to go through an SEA, strategic environmental assessment of the NPPF every single time you make a change. It sort of curtails national policymakers in the form of the minister to sort of be able to evolve policy in light of new things happening. And it is interesting in the NPPF, if you read it now, so we've got AI growth zones, which we wouldn't have been talking about 18 months ago. So the ability to sort of, when you need to do that little flex of policy, obviously not at the scale that we're doing it now, is actually really important. So the responsiveness of national policy, it would have curtailed that, for example. But more importantly, we think we can get the same outcome without going the statutory route.
Yeah. And actually the role of guidance is really important in planning in order to be able to flex and change, because actually the one thing that's certain is that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, isn't it? So the way we get flexibility within local plans, of course, is SPDs. And I've got to say, this has generated a lot of noise. So, you know, rumour is they're going to be phased out and that no more allowed after June 26th. So that's set the hairs running, Joanna. So what is happening?
Love an SPD. So what is introduced in the new, which was introduced in the Levelling Up Regeneration Act, is a supplementary plan.
Yeah.
So if you've got a 30-month plan window to get through your gateways and get your plan through the system, and as you say, Anna, you're looking at a plan period where you're looking at 15 years, but you're doing 5 years, then 10 years, then 15 years. As you say, things change. And so we wanted to, and obviously because this is statutory plan making, you wanted people to be able to sort of adopt something that could reflect that change and actually have weight. Okay, so supplementary plans are more weighty than SPDs and will have a sharp bit of examination and then become part of the plan. So there is a sort of way of having a stronger version of SPDs in the new system. Right, so that's point one, which is positive. What it means for SPDs now is if you're, depending where you are in your plan making, particularly if you're going to new scheme, absorb that stuff into your plan. so if you have, you know, SPDs now that you really rely on, then if they're important, they should be within the plan. And you bring them into your plan. But then there is also flex to do a few selective issues in supplementary plans, which is not everything. Talks about design, and then talks about where, in a sense, you've got an instance where something fundamental has changed in your local authority area, for which you need to do something update and do a supplementary plan. And that might be, I mean, the classic would be like a completely different development pressure or a large site coming forward that you think, okay, this really needs some plan and needs some.
That's what I was going to raise.
Policy. And you then sort of again can use that within a supplementary plan. So my advice is start looking at your SPDs, start looking at how you would absorb them into your plan, and then consider those issues that fall within the guidance within, well, not the guidance, the policies within the draft NPPF, which are other circumstances within which you can prepare a supplementary plan. So they're just evolving. They're not. It's just the policies being absorbed, and there's a new, stronger form of policy in supplementary plans.
And also, you know, so they're no longer you don't have to supplement, you need it in core policy, or you take up by exception for the supplementary plan. I mean, you know, I was going to ask you about the design point, because they used an awful lot of design around major sites. So, you know, that we wouldn't want councils to stop doing that.
No, absolutely not. So, and actually, if you look at the NPPF text, draft text itself, it's clear on that you can. So what the evolution that people may or may not picked up is that while in the Levelling Up Regeneration Act, we were going to mandate, you had to prepare an area-wide, a local authority-wide design code. We're no longer mandating that.
Right.
But you can prepare a supplementary plan that addresses locally specific design and placemaking policies. So, but we're saying it's not mandated. It's not you have to. It's if you think you need to, you can, and that can be across the whole of the geography of your local authority area. But then other policies should really be sort of site specific in the main when you want to use the supplementary plan approach.
Yeah, and I think that's how councils tend to use them anyway.
So I mean, those that use them as a regeneration tool, it's for usually for a specific site, large site or area of significant change, and they do a master plan, create a supplementary guidance. This would be, we'll do a master plan. It's our regeneration strategy for a tight geographical area, and we'll prepare that as a supplementary plan, which will have more weight.
Yeah, I expect you're going to get a lot of comments on SPD.
It's fine.
So just bring them on. So if we move down to the detail then, so the inside-outside settlement policies, because obviously this is quite new, and as usual, the detail around how do you define who's in, who's out, all of that is creating a lot of noise. So do you want to try and explain how you dealt with that?
So that's the primary place that it's introduced is in chapter 4, it's achieving sustainable development, and the principle of the presumption, let's call it, is in policy 3, S3, and then the inside settlement is in policy S4, and the outside settlement is policy S5. The basic point is it'll be for local authorities to define their settlement boundaries.
Okay.
And then what's very clear is it's basically saying if it's sites within settlement, so this is even more forward-leaning than a brownfield first or brownfield presumption, then, you know, we should be seeking to use land efficiently within our urban areas, and we should be looking at those locations and those proposals really proactively and you know, positively. And so that's the sort of presumption on the inside settlement. And then the big introduction for the outside of settlement, policy 5, is this principle of locations and land around stations outside of settlement. Okay. And that's where you get this sort of, this is where you have to read the footnote, which talks about the 60 biggest from a GDP point of view, travel to work areas. So again, these sort of are economic main urban areas, and those that are served by decent transport service of basically sort of 4 train trams per hour. And that it's not about doing development that's kind of like over there is the station, something over there completely, you know, uncontiguous and car dependent. It's about saying something that genuinely can benefit from the accessibility of that public transport and inherently be sustainable. I think the other policy in the land section, which has a bearing on this, is to do with density expectations in locations around stations, where again we're saying in those well-located locations you can set a density standard, you know, and there should be an expectation about 50 dwellings per hectare, and outside of that in other station locations about 40 per hectare. So those policies sort of speak to each other.
But we're not going back to, you know, the minimum densities of the past, you know, where we've got these, you know, I describe them as less than desirable housing sites that were on top of each other. You know, we've learned a lot about design, haven't we? So you can do minimum density well.
And I think this is where, you know, all the policies in the NPPF, and it states it very clearly, as we know, you have to consider them all together. And that's where I think there's sort of really strong policies in both the design placemaking strategy plan section and the transport section and others, but those two are really powerful on and you know, designing things out in sustainable locations to be inherently sustainable in terms of transport choices, and addressing that up front in this kind of vision-led transport and land use planning approach, and then, you know, be really intentional around density urban design principles, and then even in the green space and, you know, the healthy communities chapter, which talks about the role and purpose of green space. You know, this is about what we do in this country really well, which is cohesive, comprehensive, you know, multi inputs and multi outcomes planning. And I think people will find that the PPG and the work that we're going to put the latest on the design placemaking guidance that sits below, as I mentioned, the NPPF will help in that regard, because again, it's an amplification of these kind of core principles. And I think documents that colleagues will be very familiar with in terms of the National Design Code and the Design Guide, and sort of bringing that to life, it takes it to the sort of next step.
Yeah, and it always reminds me when we're going through these, Joanna, like at the bottom of local plans, we always used to have like a bit that said, please don't forget to read all the policies together, you know, and every page it was on. And I feel like we have to really emphasize that with national policy, because we wouldn't want the headline issues to take over from some of the really important foundations that are in the document. So if we could get into the 10% of housing requirement for small sites, so the SME policy, I would call it. Can we, because there's concern on our chat, which is around how are you meant to do that if you've got a huge number, you know? So if your housing target is massive, then you could need quite a lot of sites at that size. So is there some pragmatism in this, or you know, because so a 10% requirement is a requirement?
I mean, I suppose it sounds like a slopey shouldered response, but the point is if people are worried about that, tell us, and ask the question of us formally, and as I said, through the feedback sessions. I mean, it's quite intentional. There's quite a lot of policy that's very intentionally about supporting the SME sector, and as colleagues know, it's a sector that, you know, has diminished in capacity over the years, but yet delivers at speed, and can really you know, help in delivering against the housing crisis, and are very nuanced and very local in how they respond to context and so on. So this is a policy to make sure that, you know, there is enough opportunity being presented locally to SMEs, and it is wedded also to, you know, things that we've also announced alongside the NPPF around being more proportionate in terms of the application of BNG, for example, switching it off from microsites and having a more moderated approach to those sort of small to medium sized sites as well. So I do think it's important that, and again, it's sort of interesting. We're also doing, it's also about, and many local authorities do this really well, which is they describe a sort of design outcome for small sites that are expected, interesting through SPD and so on. Which gives certainty to the SME market, which sort of said, okay, and if you can have a list of sites that are available, if you can marry those two things up, with a really sharp DM process, which will probably be not going to committee, may or may not be going to committee, but may be going to planning officers underneath the national scheme of delegation, you know, you can see how you can sort of be saying to a sector, we're serious. We're there's sort of like the open for business approach,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
And we're guiding, or we're giving clarity as to expectation and opportunity to the SME sector. So yeah, it's all part of that.
But I expect, I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Yeah.
but actually Parliament's probably really interested in how councils could deliver that.
Yeah, oh, completely.
So actually the innovation around that and some suggestions as to how you could could be quite interesting, couldn't they?
Yeah.
She said in a planning geek way.
Yeah,
I'd be quite interested.
The department, I mean, there's lots, I mean, the department moves, and as you know, local government does as well, moves at many fronts all at once. And there is work going on around what's called a small sites accelerator, where you know, with Bristol and a couple of other local authorities, where you know, proactively sort of present the opportunities to the market. So, you know, yeah, lots going on in space. It's not purely just in the planning policy space, but more in the housing space as well.
Yeah. So going even more detailed now, can we talk about standards?
Yes.
Because I know we've talked about this before, but there's a few questions that are quite detailed about standards, particularly around energy and climate change and things like that. Do you want to talk about what the ministry are doing about standards?
Yeah, so there's really important policies that touch on, if you read from the bottom of the page up, actually, touch really importantly on the relationship of planning policy and building regulations. And the fact that there's two particular areas of building regulations that do very much touch on planning policy, and where there is sort of an overlap, but that in effect that in this sort of trying to streamline policy, local plan policies down to the essential and not touching on other regulatory regimes or sort of overlaying them, that there's sort of there's a very strong steer and outline in the draft policy about where that line could be drawn. It's worth seeing that, particularly in the building reg space, in the context of the Future Homes Standard, which the government and the department have been working on for some time now. Which, if colleagues don't know about it, it's basically a sort of national, well, England-wide standard for the energy performance of the home. The department is responsible for that. Is due to, and this is our, you know, colleagues in the wider department, issue you know, the Future Home Standard, and then you will have this nationally prescribed standard which talks about everything you'd imagine within the energy efficiency of the home, including the products that go into it and its function and its operation and so on and so forth. So once that's in place, that's a very strong bedrock, and giving, again, one of the things that plays through in terms of, for example, innovation in energy efficiency of the home and products that go into that, whether that's air source heat pumps or solar panels, or really importantly, modern methods of construction, is that the sector will say we need a consistent standard, because you have to have a sort of a demand coming through to then drive economies of scale. And so the relationship between the Future Home Standard and building regs, which is basically building regs and planning, should become clearer, and therefore the need to sort of evolve that at a local level should diminish. And then the upper part of the policy, if you read up the page, is also saying just sort of, you know, where policies, local policies, are sort of broadly going to be acceptable and where it's not, sort of to sort of overly localised policy. So yeah, but important. And I get, if you link that through to conversation about SPGs, conversation about the role and purpose of national development management policies, and that sort of test of heat, then, you know, that feels like a lot of change. But what it's doing is back to, as you were saying, Anna, the sort of, if we do things once and smartly, we don't need to repeat them.
And also, I think, you know, the join up between building control and planning, quite often in councils, they sit together in the same directorate, even the same service, and yet the interface probably could be better. I would say, having managed this myself, it could be better. So some of this shared ambition is quite important, actually, to how we work and LGR and all those sorts of things. Should we end on our favourite subject, which is capacity, accessibility? So, I mean, all of this change is going to need everybody who's already working in the system, but also a new range of people, isn't it? And I think that's the exciting part for me, is that there's quite a lot here that requires some newly formed skill sets. So I know them, but can you tell everybody else what the ministry is doing about capability and capacity?
Yeah, so and with huge thanks to Anna and the team at PAS and the local government team, and also public practice and others, and you all out there. There was a manifested commitment to recruit 300 planners, and we are now targeting 1,400. And that is, enabled by funding that's been committed through actually this budget and the previous budget, which is a brilliant state of play to get to, and recognising quite how stretched local authorities are. We have also shifted over the course of the last couple of years to now be doing salary bursaries as well as paying for masters. So let me just talk a little bit about the two programmes if you haven't clocked them, but I'm sure you have. But Pathways to Planning is a graduate programme. The team get in about 2,000 young people and sometimes not so young people for every cohort that they go out for. There is a massive appetite out there. One of the strange advantages of being in the headlines the whole time, it appears, as planning, is that everybody's really interested in it. And I just keep hearing snippets of, of sort of people saying, oh, such and such is, daughter or son, or people keep hearing about random people's kids who are going for this programme. And what's fascinating about it is they can be a graduate in anything. And if they've got a keen interest in planning. Now, interestingly, it's becoming quite competitive. And so the demand from young people to be part of this journey with all of us is really, really high and super exciting. We recognise it's difficult to recruit, hence the sort of salary bursary. And in effect, the demand levels now coming from colleagues in local government is not quite matching the supply.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you might want to comment on that. But then also just quickly to mention public practice again, that's about getting people in at a mid-career level who might be pivoting from another profession. And we're bolstering that. And we've just secured, basically in the last budget, 5 million per annum, which we've got to design it to sort of do a mid-careers hub, like an ability to, again, grow people both already in local government, but people might want to shift within local government or come into local government and really support this service. And then I should say this goes across not just our traditional local government services, but also recognising the NSIP and the need for national infrastructure and getting 150 development consent orders over the line, which is no small beer for the local authorities that are dealing with those projects, but also obviously the promoters of those projects and the planning inspector and so on, and our colleagues and statutory consultees who are vital to all this. So it's a big programme.
It's huge.
I suppose the challenge is getting the opportunities in local government.
Yeah, at the moment it's getting the positions established, I suppose, on organograms in local government. We see this in public practice, declare an interest as chair, and we just we have to have the positions available for people to go into. So I suppose if you can try and make these positions available, there's funding available, and we're starting as of next year to do retraining, all sorts of exciting stuff to try and get more of that experience into the system. So keep in touch with us. And I have to finish there. I've just got to say about our other NPPF sessions that are coming up. Thank you so much, Joanna. Always a pleasure. So we've got in-person sessions that are all booked out, and I say that with great excitement because actually getting people to come out in person has been a really big challenge since COVID. So thank you to everybody who's watching this who is also coming to one of those sessions. We also have a load of online sessions available that you can still book onto, and we have deep dive sessions on some of the issues that Joanna and I have covered